Imagine waking up tomorrow and the GPS grid over Mumbai is just completely blind. Financial transactions freeze up, power grids lose their synchronization, logistics networks just halt. And yet there wasn't a single explosion. I mean, no troops crossed a border. Under current international law, is that even an act of war?
Yeah, the terrifying reality is we don't actually know. The law simply hasn't caught up to the weapon yet.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. If you're prepping for the UPSC exams or tracking global market trends, or, if you just want to be the most well-informed person in the room today, consider this your personal masterclass in statecraft and current affairs.
Exactly. We've got a massive stack of recent intelligence today. Everything from orbital mechanics and space warfare to the microscopic chemistry of green fuels.
Right, and our mission is to synthesize all of that for you. Our overarching theme today is, let's call it invisible shifts. We are moving away from the era where power was just measured in, like, tank divisions and smokestacks. Today, the forces reshaping your life, cyber codes, carbon tariffs, diplomatic whispers, they are almost entirely unseen.
They are. And to really unpack this, we have to start with the ultimate high ground, which is space. India just achieved a really massive milestone by putting a very unique eye in the sky.
Oh, yes, the mission Drishti satellite.
Right, it's a remarkable leap. This is a 190-kilogram satellite developed by Galaxy, which is a startup out of Bengaluru. It just went into orbit on a SpaceX Falcon 9. But what makes it historically significant is that it's the world's first OptaSAR satellite.
Okay, wait, I want to break down that term OptaSAR because, it sounds like heavy jargon, but the actual capability it represents is wild because traditional observation satellites basically give you a choice, right? Like you either get a high-definition photograph or you get radar data.
Yeah, that's the historical trade-off. So electro-optical sensors give you those beautiful, detailed visual images we see all the time. But if there's a thunderstorm or, if it's nighttime over your target, that sensor is functionally blind.
Right, just these clouds.
Exactly. Now, the alternative is synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. Radar waves pass right through clouds and darkness. It gives you structural data, but it doesn't give you a clear optical picture.
Okay, so OptaSAR merges both payloads into one single synchronized platform.
Yes.
So it's essentially having a high-powered flashlight and an X-ray machine operating at the exact same time. And the implication there for, like, defense or border security is continuous, unblinking surveillance. You never lose sight of a troop movement just because the weather turned bad.
Unblinking is the perfect word. And that persistence changes tactical intelligence entirely. But, it also introduces a massive vulnerability.
How so?
Because while having those eyes in the sky is an incredible strategic advantage, those eyes rely on very fragile data links. Modern space warfare is no longer about lasers physically blowing up satellites and making debris fields.
Oh, right. It's about silencing them. It's cyber warfare in space.
Exactly. It's digital disruption.
Like what we saw in 2022, right? The attack on the Viasat network right as the Ukraine conflict escalated. Terminals across Europe just went dark. It's like breaking a smartphone, but on a planetary scale.
And if you are studying international law, this is your absolute nightmare scenario. Because if you look at Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter, it prohibits the use of force between states.
But historically, force means, like, kinetic energy, right? Smoke, fire, shattered concrete.
Right, but what if a cyber intrusion functionally disables a civilian satellite network that a military relies on? States are beginning to argue that if the strategic consequence is identical to a missile strike, it should be treated as a use of force. Loss of functionality is the new shattered glass.
But the hurdle there is always attribution, isn't it? If a missile hits you, you track its trajectory back to a launch pad. But if a piece of malware routes through a dozen proxy servers, how do you actually prove beyond a reasonable doubt who fired it?
You often can't. That attribution gap is the shield that modern state-backed hackers hide behind. And the waters get even murkier with the collapse of the civilian-military divide.
Are you talking about the Starlink precedent?
Yes. We now have commercial, civilian-owned satellite networks, providing what is essentially space as a service to military units on the ground. Once a civilian asset directly facilitates combat operations, well, traditional laws of armed conflict might classify it as a legitimate military target.
Which means a private company's hardware suddenly becomes a strategic flashpoint. So how is India protecting its own assets in this gray zone?
There is a major doctrinal shift happening right now. India's upcoming 2026 CERTIN and SIA India guidelines are institutionalizing a concept called secure by design.
Secure by design. Okay, meaning what, practically?
Meaning instead of building a satellite and then just slapping antivirus software on it before launch, The cybersecurity architecture is embedded into the actual blueprint. It anticipates signal jamming and GPS spoofing from the moment the first component is drafted.
Wow. You know, what fascinates me is that this exact tension-like, unaccountable actors controlling invisible infrastructure, it isn't just happening in orbit, it's playing out right now inside the device in your pocket. The whole battle over artificial intelligence monopolies.
Oh, absolutely. It is the exact same dynamic of unchecked monopoly power. Look at the European Union's Digital Markets Act, the DMA.
Right.
The EU is currently taking aim at Google's Android ecosystem. They're essentially demanding that Google open up deep-level integrations, like the hardware wake words and Gemini's context-aware intelligence, to third-party AI developers.
Yeah, the EU's argument here is all about interoperability. If one corporation controls the operating system, the search engine, and the primary AI assistant, I mean, they act as the ultimate gatekeeper of information. But it gets so much darker when you move from consumer tech to military application.
Palantir.
Yes. Palantir's Maven smart system. It's now reportedly being used to synthesize battlefield data and select targets in active combat zones. We are literally outsourcing life and death hard power to corporate algorithms.
And how are the tech companies responding to the existential risks as their own products? By writing their own rules. Like, Anthropic recently published what they call Claude's Constitution.
Right, I read about this.
It is an internal document programmed into their AI, giving it moral precepts to prevent it from, say, generating instructions for a biological weapon. Internally, they actually refer to it as the soul doc.
I have to pause there. A corporation programming a soul into a weaponizable technology and asking us to just trust their internal constitution is a massive leap of faith. Like, what happens when a rival company or a rival nation state decides that ethics are just slowing down their development cycle?
Well, that is the precise warning Brazilian President Lula da Silva delivered recently. He argued vehemently that the Global South cannot allow a handful of corporations in the Global North to monopolize AI. If left completely unregulated by international treaties, AI won't just reflect global inequalities, it will exponentially deepen them.
And this brings up a crucial realization for anyone tracking current affairs. Regulatory frameworks are the new geopolitical weapons. The EU isn't just trying to tame digital monopolies. They are using regulation to force a massive shift in global trade. Which brings us to the new currencies of power, carbon, and green tech.
Yes. The European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, is the perfect example of this.
Let's break CBAM down.
In simple terms, it is a carbon tax levied on specific imports, like steel, cement, aluminum entering the EU market.
Okay, but if I am an industrialist in a developing nation, I'm looking at CBAM and thinking this is incredibly hypocritical. Europe spent 2 centuries burning cheap coal to build its wealth. Now that developing nations like India are industrializing, Europe throws up a green tariff.
Exactly.
It basically forces Indian exporters to pay for Europe's decarbonization, while European domestic companies are getting massive subsidies.
You've hit on the core friction of modern climate diplomacy. It is a massive transfer of wealth disguised as environmentalism. But there is a brilliant counter-strategy currently being debated, proposed by financial strategists like Archie Parnell. It's called IBAM, an India Border Adjustment Mechanism.
Okay, walk me through how an IBAM would actually function in the real world.
So India recently established its own domestic carbon credit trading scheme. Now, if you look closely at Article 9 of the EU's CBAM regulation, it contains a crucial loophole, or a provision, really.
Okay.
It states that if a product has already been subjected to a domestic carbon price in its country of origin, that exact amount can be deducted from the tax owed at the European border.
Oh, wow. So it operates exactly like a toll booth. If Indian steel is going to be slapped with a carbon toll either way, India should be the one lowering the boom and collecting that toll before the ship ever leaves the harbor.
Precisely. You implement a domestic border tax that mirrors the European one. The product still faces the same total tax burden, but the revenue stays in New Delhi instead of going to Brussels.
And then India can ring-fence those billions of dollars and inject them directly back into its own domestic industries.
Right, funding greener furnaces, subsidizing clean energy. It turns a punitive European tariff into a domestic green funding engine.
That is incredible. And, you know, we are seeing India's capacity to innovate its way through this green transition on a micro level, too. I want to bring up this fascinating story from Kendla Port in Gujarat.
Oh, the Bio-methanol project.
Yes. It involves this invasive shrub called Prosopis juliflora, known locally as Gundo bawal. For decades, this plant has been an absolute nightmare. It degrades soil, it monopolizes groundwater, ruins grazing land. But scientists have actually figured out how to turn this nuisance into biomethanol.
It is a masterclass in the circular economy. They are utilizing a thermochemical process known as biomass gasification. And it's important to understand how this works, because you don't just set the wood on fire.
Because if you give it oxygen, it just burns up into ash and carbon dioxide, right?
Exactly. By restricting the oxygen, you force the material through pyrolysis. The molecular bonds of the wood break down, releasing a mixture of carbon monoxide, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide.
Which is called syngas.
Right, syngas. You then scrub the syngas to remove impurities, tweak the hydrogen to carbon ratio, and pass it over a copper-based catalyst, and boom, the gas synthesizes into liquid biomethanol.
That is just incredible alchemy. I mean, this pilot plant is taking 15 to 20 tons of land-destroying weeds and converting them into 5 tons of clean-burning marine fuel every single day, which the port can then use to power its own tugboats.
It's brilliant.
But of course, balancing ecological realities with strategic infrastructure isn't always a neat, closed loop. Take the scrutiny around the Great Nicobar project.
Right, that is a prime example of the friction between rapid strategic development and ecological preservation.
And the debate here is very sharp. To report this impartially, on one side, the Congress Party is aggressively pushing for a parliamentary review. They're contesting the government's official stance that the project will only utilize 1.82% of the island's landmass.
Right, they're highlighting the ecological fragility.
Exactly. And raising serious legal and ethical questions about whether the indigenous Shampan tribe was properly consulted. But on the other side, the government maintains that a transshipment port and military presence in the Bay of Bengal are non-negotiable strategic necessities. They state all environmental clearances follow due diligence. So it's a real standoff over what true national security looks like.
And that concept of national security increasingly relies on internal resilience. The chief economic advisor recently released data detailing the explosive growth of India's inland waterways.
Oh, yeah.
And this isn't just about moving cargo a few rupees cheaper. In a world where global supply chains are acutely vulnerable to geopolitical shocks, just look at the Red Sea disruptions, internal logistics become your strategic buffer.
Right. If external shipping lanes are choked, a robust inland waterway system ensures your domestic economy doesn't just suffocate.
Exactly.
And that domestic resilience is so critical right now because when we look at our external borders, the friction is palpable. The situation with Nepal is a perfect example of how diplomatic Cold Wars impact local realities.
They do. Prime Minister Balendra Shah has taken a noticeably hardline approach recently. He intentionally bypassed traditional diplomatic protocols, like the Democracy Day greetings, and is limiting access for foreign envoys.
And this diplomatic chill has actually manifested in a formal territorial protest. Nepal has officially objected to the route of the Kailash Manasarovar Yatra passing through the Kalapani-Lipulekh region. They firmly stated to both New Delhi and Beijing that they consider this sovereign Nepali territory.
And statecraft is one thing, but the human cost of these border frictions is immediate. Historically, the India-Nepal border has thrived on the roti-beti connection.
The fluid exchange of food, commerce, marriage.
Right. But with 63% of Nepal's trade dependent on India, any hardening of that border causes immediate economic pain. Like, look at the story from the reports about Hamza Khan.
The tailor in Sitamarhi.
Yes, on the BR border. His family shop has stood for 2 generations. Now it's caught in the middle of widespread anti-encroachment drives. The state justifies these drives as necessary security measures to prevent illegal infiltration along a porous border. But for local merchants, it means the sudden erasure of their livelihoods.
Yeah, a deep sense of displacement. And when you have that level of neighborhood friction, you have to control the broader narrative, which really explains why the Indian government is currently executing this massive coordinated diplomatic blitz.
May was an unprecedented month for Indian diplomacy. It kicked off with the 11th Heads of Missions Conference. The Prime Minister delivered a very clear directive to Indian envoys. The era of reactive diplomacy is over. He emphasized proactive, aggressive messaging to shape global perceptions.
And we immediately saw that in action. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar executed a comprehensive tour of the CARICOM nations in the Caribbean, building leverage there. Simultaneously, the PM prepared for a 5-nation European tour, anchoring the Nordic India Summit. This isn't just handshaking. It is a full-court press to secure trade alliances.
Because if you look at the global board, the warning lights are flashing red everywhere. A nation's foreign policy has to be incredibly agile.
Let's actually unpack some of these global flashes because they all directly impact India's strategic calculus. First, the Indian Army sent a specialized contingent to Cambodia for the CINBX-2 joint counterterrorism exercise.
A clear signal of projecting a security footprint into Southeast Asia.
Exactly. Then you look at North America. Canada has officially designated Khalistani extremists as a national security threat in their public reports.
Which is massive. For years, New Delhi argued that Ottawa was turning a blind eye to these factions. Canada legally acknowledging this threat is a huge vindication of India's diplomatic pressure.
And economically, the energy markets are shifting. OPEC Plus recently announced a hike in oil production quotas. But the critical detail there is that the UAE's massive spare reserves remain deliberately untapped.
That is pure market manipulation. OPEC Plus knows that if the UAE floods the market, the price per barrel crashes. By keeping those reserves locked, they artificially maintain a price floor, which directly dictates inflation for a major importer like India.
And speaking of energy logistics, the drone warfare in Eastern Europe has taken a new turn. Ukrainian strikes are now systematically targeting Russia's shadow fleet in the Black Sea.
The unmarked tankers.
Right, the ones Moscow uses to bypass Western sanctions. But, every single one of these events requires an incredibly stable government at home to manage. You cannot project power globally if you are fractured domestically.
Which brings us to the pulse of domestic governance. The health of a democracy is constantly tested by how it balances security with civic freedom. And right now, there is a profound debate centered around the IT rules of 2021 and online censorship.
Let's talk about the mechanism of these rules. Under Sections 69A and 79 of the IT Act, the government wields immense leverage over platforms like X and Meta. Section 79 traditionally provides safe harbor.
Meaning a platform cannot be sued for what a random user posts?
Right. It's the legal shield that allows social media to even exist. But the new rules stipulate that if a platform fails to comply with a government takedown order within a severely tight window, sometimes as short as 3 hours, they automatically lose that safe harbor protection.
They instantly become legally liable for millions of posts.
And the tension here is razor sharp. Again, looking at both sides neutrally. The government argues this speed is absolutely vital. If an AI-generated deepfake intended to spark a riot goes viral, waiting 3 days for a court order is useless.
The damage is done.
Exactly. But critics point out the terrifying downside. Without judicial oversight, this mechanism creates a massive chilling effect, allowing the state to force the censorship of lawful dissent, journalist accounts, and political opposition under the vague banner of public order.
It is the defining struggle of modern governance, right? Regulating the speed of the digital age without breaking the democratic architecture. But ultimately, the truest metric of a democracy is participation.
And the assembly polls right now are demonstrating incredible stamina. In West Bengal, the Election Commission deployed 165 additional counting observers, a massive effort to ensure transparency. In Assam, we are watching a highly contested race between the NDA and the Congress-led front. Kerala is showing a robust provisional voter turnout of nearly 80%.
But from a purely analytical standpoint, the most fascinating disruption is unfolding in Tamil Nadu.
Oh, absolutely. The entry of Kollywood superstar Vijay and his newly formed TVK party.
Right. For half a century, Tamil Nadu politics has been a strict bipolar duopoly controlled by the DMK and the AIADMK.
And TVK is functionally fracturing that landscape. By leveraging his massive cultural capital and targeting the youth demographic, Vijay isn't just participating. His party is acting as a powerful vote splitter. It just shows that even the most entrenched legacy systems are vulnerable to cultural shifts.
But the true measure of a state isn't just how it conducts elections. It's how it cares for its most vulnerable citizens once the voting is over.
Which brings us to a monumental shift happening in public health right now, the new framework for childhood diabetes.
Yeah. The Ministry of Health just rolled out a comprehensive framework. Historically, public health systems treat diseases reactively. You get sick, you go to the hospital. This framework shifts the entire model to proactive, universal screening.
They are aiming to screen every child in India, from birth up to 18 years of age. But screening is useless if a family can't afford the treatment. So the state is establishing a continuum of care. If a child is diagnosed, the public health facility provides free, lifelong treatment.
That is massive. That includes the insulin therapy, which is prohibitively expensive for many, and the daily monitoring devices like glucometers.
Removing that financial devastation for low-income families is the kind of invisible infrastructure that alters the trajectory of a whole generation. And just to quickly round out the civic realities we are tracking, It's been a heavy week on the safety front.
Yes. The tragic fire in the Vivek Vihar residential building in Delhi, which claimed 9 lives. Initial investigations point to an overloaded AC unit, highlighting the critical need for urban fire safety audits.
And in Madhya Pradesh, recovery teams finally located the bodies of the last 2 victims of the Jabalpur cruise accident in the Bargi Dam.
It's been a tough week. Though on a complex medico-legal front, there is a vital consensus emerging regarding abortion laws and minors. The directive firmly establishes that any decision to terminate a pregnancy for a minor must be anchored entirely in sound medical advice.
This is such a crucial legal insight. It essentially shields medical professionals. It dictates that the physiological and psychological safety of the minor, as determined by a medical board, supersedes the whims of guardians or external pressures.
It places science and patient welfare at the absolute center of the law, which is exactly what good governance should do, anchor difficult decisions in objective reality.
Well, we have covered an immense landscape today. We started in orbit, looking at how the OptaSAR sensors of mission Drishti pierce through the weather, and how cyber warfare is threatening those satellites. We unpacked how the EU is using laws like the DMA and CBAM to regulate invisible algorithms and carbon emissions.
We examined how a toxic weed in Gujarat is being transformed into bio-methanol through pyrolysis. We navigated the diplomatic tightropes of the Great Nicobar project, the shifting borders of Nepal, and the strategic calculus behind Canada's security declarations and OPEC's oil quotas.
And we brought it all back home, looking at the tension of IT censorship, the disruption of Tamil Nadu's elections, and the life-saving impact of free insulin for kids.
You know, if you take a step back and look at the through line connecting all of this, it brings us right back to our original premise. We used to measure power by what we could physically see. But as you navigate the complexities of this week, whether it's the proxy codes disabling a satellite, the carbon tariffs reshaping global steel markets, the algorithms deciding what news you are allowed to read, or the diplomatic back channels keeping oil prices afloat, you really have to ask yourself a fundamental question.
Are the most powerful forces shaping your reality the ones standing in plain sight, or are they the ones operating entirely in the shadows?
Exactly. The world has gone invisible. Your job is to learn how to see it.
Keep questioning the narrative, keep looking for those unseen levers of power, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.